Hey, camera's rolling again. Oh, right. So, where I have in my notes that we left off is in Proverbs chapter 24, verse 27. Proverbs chapter 24, verse 27. But verse 26, right before that, there isn't a question on that verse, I don't believe, but I'll go ahead and read it. It says, "Whoever gives an honest answer kisses the lips." Some versions say it differently, but an honest answer is like a kiss on the lips. Now, technology. He just keeps reading. This is a good opportunity to bring up the idea of culture. Remember, in this particular culture, even later on when it says in the Bible, greet one another with a holy kiss. Who is kissing who or whom? Do you all remember? It would typically be men kissing men. Very close culture. That's just the way they did things. That scripture is not justifying misuse, okay? For some people like myself, if you say an honest answer is like a kiss on the lips, well, especially growing up as a kid, then I don't want to be too honest, apparently, because that's gross. I'd rather just avoid that entirely. Kisses were one of the great fears that I had as a child. You know, somebody's going to kiss me. What's worse? One time they had lipstick, and it stayed on, and I didn't know about it for a while. Ooh, it's terrible. It's terrible. But we still have to remember, like, this is, you get the flavor of it, right? Whether or not you can agree personally as to how great a thing kissing on the lips is for you is beside the point. We were talking about how to understand God's word within the culture that it was written, and that's what's speaking to us today. So if an honest answer is like a kiss on the lips, we're saying that is a great thing. That is something that is good, because that's what this is suggesting. So that's a good little excuse for us to talk about culture just briefly. And with that, let's get into verse 27 and our first question. Question number 12 says, what practical matters should one consider before entering into marriage? Could somebody read Proverbs chapter 24, verse 27?
Do your planning, prepare your fields before building your house.
So what's the advice that he's giving?
Plan.
Yeah, plan. Plan. Before you get into a situation, you know, marriage is a good example. That's just a hypothetical we brought up in this question here. But get your ducks in a row. Make sure, do you have the means to take care of this? Primarily, he seems to be talking about economical reasons. You need to establish yourself. You need to get that field ready, get your work situation ready to go. Question 13. What should a disciple of wisdom avoid in respect to a neighbor? Verse 29.
Do not say, I'll do to him as he has done to me. I'll pay that man back for what he did.
Yeah, so what is he talking about? Getting even. Getting revenge. Yeah, you've got to avoid that. You've got to avoid that. Now, why is it we are tempted to get revenge? Well, I guess we were hurt, right? But I like the way you said it because it's a good illustration. We always say, I'm going to get even. You notice that? What are we implying when we say even?
Do the same back to that.
The same
or
back.
something.
So in other words, are we picturing in our mind, maybe not intentionally, but in our mind we're picturing a sort of scale system, right? And the scales have just been tipped the wrong way. And when I say I'm going to get even, what am I doing? I'm going to do something bad back so that the scales get tipped back, so to speak, right? Isn't this kind of the conception we have? Well, have you noticed that, at least in the way I observe this, the scales never actually get even? You ever observe that? What usually happens when somebody offends you or does something that wasn't right, the scales are tipped. And you say, well, I'll make things even. What do? Probably, what? You probably tend to overcompensate a little bit because you think, I want you to know what kind of suffering this caused me or whatever. So, and then the scales get tilted back that way. Now, what happens when the scales are tilted the other way? What does that person do?
Worse.
Well, I'm going to get even then because you went too far this way. And then they go back, and what do you have? This is rocking the boat. You're rocking the boat. But back and forth, it never quits. This is why, fun little innocent pranks seem so nice and fun and innocent. But nobody stops to think, where do these things go? I heard some crazy stories about college students talking about some of the pranks that they pull on people, and I'm like, that is just disgusting. We are beyond the realm of humor. This is gross. What imaginable reason do you have for doing something like that? Well, just getting even. But we can never really get even because we don't see, we're trusting our own judgment, and our judgment is skewed. So what does Scripture tell us to do? Particularly in the book of James, he really plays this out. How are we supposed to get even with people? Because we know we were really cheated. A lot of times people really do us harm, and it's not fair. So how are we as Christians supposed to accept the fact that it's going to be made right? How are we supposed to get even if we're not allowed to do anything ourselves? What's the scriptural solution?
Trusting God that He's going to take care of it.
Yes, that's exactly right. God's going to make it even. And when He says even, He knows what even really is. He knows the scales. We don't know. We're always going to skew it. So you don't take revenge. You leave room for God. God evens things out. And that's His job. And then you don't have to worry about it. It's out of your hands. If they're mad, well, you're not going to get the prank back. I guess God's going to get it. And you know what? God's big enough to handle things Himself. If they're dumb enough to try to attack Him, then that is on them. So, got to avoid seeking revenge. Got to avoid it. And by the way, isn't that interesting? This whole idea of revenge. Revenge kind of presupposes that you did something wrong to me, right? That the scales were thrown off, so to speak. How young do people develop a sense of wanting revenge? I think some people, before they're even talking like they should, they know what revenge is and they want to get it. Isn't it amazing, this concept of fairness and equality in the way things should really be, that it's developed from this tiny, tiny age, this really young age? It's incredible to me, because it doesn't make any sense in a world without God. Yeah.
What's the new word for revenge? Getting punked.
Oh,
That's what my son said when I went to sit down at a birthday party. He put a balloon
Oh, yeah.
on my seat,
Thanks, son.
and and he said, "Daddy, you stink again."
Oh.
I got
Man.
revenge on him too.
Oh, there you go.
I got him with the
Continues.
paint. I got him with the paint gun.
Now, by the way, I do want to be careful. I'm not suggesting that all forms of joking or practical jokes are somehow sinful or wrong. I'm not suggesting that. I think there is a clear difference, and maybe tonight, maybe next week, we'll get to discuss that briefly, because I think it comes up in one of the Proverbs. But yeah, even from the youngest of age, we understand the concept in a very vague way of fairness, and we know what revenge is, because things are supposed to be this way. Well, why? See, you were born with a desire a lot greater than yourself, a desire that no cat or dog or animal or plant has. And it's what the Bible talks about. It's what God has put inside of us. And I don't know how people who reject God can explain that, because there just isn't really a good way to see it, that I can see anyway. Question 14. What did the teacher learn at the field and vineyard of a sluggard? Verse 32 and 33.
When I saw, I reflected upon it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest.
Can you go ahead and read 34 as well?
Then your poverty will come as a robber, and you want like an armed man.
Yes. So what does he observe in the vineyard of this sluggard? Well, what he observes is a man that's like, oh. It's like some people I know when their alarm goes off. What do they think? An obnoxious sounding thing. Just a little more. 5 more minutes. Yeah. Does 5 more minutes really help you? Be honest. Did 5 minutes make all the... Did anyone ever wake up one day and it was terrible, but they slept 5 more minutes, and it's great. I'm up, ready to tackle my life. Yeah, no way. And for that matter, if you stop and think about it, some people just keep hitting that snooze button for like 2.5 hours, right? They keep going. Well, wouldn't it have been nice to just sleep 2.5 more hours rather than wake up every 3 minutes? But whatever, it's what we do. So why is this linked to the sluggard? In the concept of the field and the vineyard, let's connect these dots here. Why is sleep connected to the sluggard, the lazy person?
Can't work if you're sleeping.
Yeah, it's awfully hard to get valuable work done when you're sleeping. Some people might argue and say, no, I can't, I'm so good at it. Sorry, no. You're not as effective as you might think when you're asleep, all right? You're just not. You cannot get good work done. And particularly this kind of work, farming, that requires going outside, that requires some labor. It's pretty labor intensive. So what happens? You can tell when someone really likes sleep. Why? Because look at their field. Look at their field, and you can tell, haven't put too much time in there, right? Does this lesson apply anywhere else in life? I sure think it does. How can you tell when somebody's lazy on any particular aspect of their life? Look at it.
It shows.
It does, doesn't it? How does it show?
Things don't get done.
Things don't get done. I'm thinking, what if it's a character issue? What if you have, I don't know, you've got this real anger problem. You just get mad all the time. Okay. If we observe you for the next decade, and we observe that your temper hasn't changed, what is it safe to assume? Have you spent much time trying to correct your anger issues? Have you? No. It's safe to say that in regards to your temper, you have been lazy. Which, this is a complete side note, and sometimes I just think things should be intuitive to people, but maybe they're not, so I'm just going to say it anyway. And this is personal, all right? It's not exactly biblical, I don't think. But you can practice, if you have an anger issue, you can practice and get better on that, for sure. I don't know about you guys, but what's the word that comes to your mind when you've got a 5-pound sledgehammer and then wham right on your thumb? What's the word that comes? Don't say it out loud. Please don't.
Ouch.
But hopefully it's not. Anyway, are there happy thoughts that come to mind at that moment? Probably not. I'm going to assume most of you are like me. You don't think very happy thoughts. So what do? You outburst. Well, every time that happens, I learned this from a pretty young age, that is an opportunity to practice right there. You just smacked your thumb with a hammer. You have this incredible urge to let something fly out of your mouth. It may be bad, it may be not so bad, but still, you have this incredible urge. Well, can you squelch it? I couldn't for a while, but the more I practiced, I got to a point where I would just practice. You know what? I know I could scream, and it wouldn't be sinful or wrong, but I want to practice my self-control, so I'm not going to do it. That's really hard, really hard when that happens again. And I fail at that time and time again. But I can tell you just from small life experience, you get better when you practice ways like that. Some of us are so far over here and we're wondering why we blow up on people and we lose our temper all the time. Well, maybe we need to practice back there when we hit our hammer on our thumb. Maybe we need to be focusing more on those little times when nobody's around. You can practice not giving into this outburst desire that you have, and slowly you become better. I just think there are little things like that we can do. So don't deceive yourself. You're lazy. If you've got a problem in a certain area, odds are you have been lazy in regards to that area. Now, we all make this mistake from time to time. And there are some areas where I'm okay. You know what? It's all right. Some of you can look at me and you can say, man, Seth, in the area of hygiene, I think you've been a little bit on the lazy side. Well, you know what? I might not disagree with that too much. There's a big part of me that is okay with that. There's another part of me that wants to stay married, so I'm constantly fighting myself, right? But you guys get the idea. There are some areas where it's like, you know what? I realize I didn't put a whole lot of time into my haircut. I just didn't consider it that much. I'm lazy in that regard, and I'm okay with that. That's kind of a non-issue. But when it's a character issue or something like that, that's a bigger deal, for sure. So we have to, I think we have to judge, what is the condition of the vineyard? And by that I mean anything that we're evaluating, any characteristic, any trait. If it's not the way it should be, is it because we've been lazy in some way leading up to that point? A lot you can learn from the sluggard. Isn't it neat how all throughout Proverbs he's like, yeah, let's look at that sluggard again. Man, this guy, laughable guy, can't even get his hand up with the, gets his hand in the dish with the food. He can't even get it to his mouth. And we're making fun of this guy right and left, but we're learning from him. Yeah.
So are you lazy? Let's say you're watching the ball game, and the wife wants you to, pull something out of the freezer or out of the stove, and you say no, wait till a commercial. And you wait till a commercial.
Mhm.
Does that mean you're lazy, or should you just get up and do what she wants you to do? I mean, I would wait till a commercial. One time though, I did wait till a commercial, and the lasagna did burn a little in the stove, because she was in the bathroom at the time.
Oh, you reap what you sow there.
Yeah.
Well, my immediate thought here is, are you lazy or not in regards to your marital communication leading up to this point with the stove and the stuff leading there? Because I would hope whatever decision you make, it is perfectly okay with that you guys have come to an agreement and that things are going to work out. So I'm going to go with, that answer. Leading up to that point, I hope you've done your homework. And if you haven't and you just wing it, we'll see what happens. But
I'm glad the couch is comfortable.
yeah, exactly. Why do you guys try to develop such big man caves and stuff? Well, we
Yeah, I
don't.
got one of those too.
We know what happens.
In the garage.
They're just getting ready. That's a really nice doghouse you got there.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say, that's another fancy name for a doghouse.
Yep, that's what it is. Okay, this puts us into the 25th chapter. So Proverbs chapter 25, the section Doc Smith titles Wisdom in the Royal Court. Question number 1. What are the 2 essentials for government policy? Can someone read 25 verses 2 through 5?
It is God's privilege to conceal things, and the king's privilege to discover them. No one can comprehend the height of heaven, the depth of the earth, or all that goes on in the king's mind. Remove the impurities from silver, and the sterling will be ready for the silversmith. Remove the wicked from the king's court, and his reign will be made secure by justice.
Okay. So, a couple of essentials mentioned here. There's really a lot to that passage, I think. But a couple of things I have written down here. First, any policy or command that's given, it needs to be clear and understandable. You know what? God is greater than we can comprehend, for sure. We're never going to fully understand God. But when we're talking about the king's glory of searching something out, he needs to be able to make something understandable. Why? Because it has to be followed by the crowd. Everyone needs to get it. So if you're communicating laws or commands that are just difficult to comprehend, I think it's not going to be followed very well, and it's going to cause some chaos. It's a good thing our government never complicates laws with too much information on them so that we're confused, because otherwise we wouldn't understand how to obey these laws properly, right? It's a good thing we don't have that happen. Wink, wink. So, but first it's got to be clear and understandable to the subjects, the people he's ruling, and then second, it needs to be righteous. What do we mean by righteous? It needs to be in harmony with what God has laid down as right and wrong. Whatever God has revealed to us as the way things should be, that is the way things should be. And so it's the ruler's job to set up a scenario that is in harmony with that, the way humanity is supposed to be, because that is how God made us. So that is a couple of essential jobs that government, that a king has. No small task, that's for sure. That's why they need prayer. No matter how bad or good they are, they need prayer. Question 2, what advice does the teacher give to those who might aspire to work in the center of government? Verses 6 through 10.
Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence, and do not claim a place among his great men. It is better for him to say to you, come up here, than for him to humiliate you before his nobles. What you have seen with your eyes, do not bring hastily to court. For what will you do in the end if your neighbor puts you in shame? If you take your neighbor to court, do not betray another's confidence, or the one who hears it may shame you, and the charge against you will stand.
So, what have we got here? What does the teacher tell those people who might want to work for the king or be involved in the government? What's the first thing we have? How does he start off? Like, when you're in front of the king,
Don't try to impress them.
yeah, don't exalt yourself. Why? What happens if you exalt yourself? You run the risk of putting yourself a little further forward than you actually should be. And then what has to happen? We got to cut you down. How much better would it have been to start off at the bottom of the totem pole and for the king or somebody else to say, whoa, come on over here. You don't belong down there. How much better is that? It's such a simple fact, but I wish more and more people understood it. In today's workforce, I shouldn't say in today's workforce, but when I hear people talking about modern leadership in the working community or whatever, if you want to do well in business, you need to have this confidence. You need to be a confident individual. Now, I think there is an element of truth to that, but sometimes I'm afraid people mix up confidence with arrogance. You know what I mean? I'm so confident I should be sitting at this head, I should be in this position, so I'm just going to assume that position now because I have confidence and I want you to see how confident I am. Well, that is flying against the biblical principle here. And I know a lot of people say it works in business, and guess what? I think a time or two, maybe it has worked. But the exception doesn't prove the rule. If that is the kind of person you are, it comes at a price. Sometimes you get put in your place right off the bat. Other times, you may keep that position for a while, but sooner or later, we know who you are. You're just trying to climb the ladder, and that's all you want. I wish people understood a little bit better this whole idea that if you want to climb the ladder, if you want to be, make it to the top, so to speak, or not even the top, but if you want to just do well in work, be a hard worker. Be a faithful, consistent, hard worker. And I believe God blesses people who do that. It's the people who are trying to get on top and looking for every opportunity they can that either don't make it, or worse, they do make it, and then they realize there's nothing for them up there. Life has no purpose up there, and they have a miserable existence. So, got to know your place. The second thing is, if you're trying to move up, you need to avoid being contentious. You know what? You see things. You see mistakes made, and this is probably good advice for us too. Nobody's perfect. People do make mistakes, and you have the opportunity to rat people out if you want. Now, sometimes that, as Christians, we've got to do that. Sometimes we cannot let things go. But we don't need to be the kind of person that is just looking to find something so that we can, I caught him over there, he messed this up, I'm going to go tell the bosses so that I can get. No, if you really want to get ahead, that's not really the way to do it. It's not really the way to help you. And then third, you should not betray confidences. If someone confides something in you, don't blab it out. What happens? Well, maybe in the short term it helps you, but what happens in the long term? You're a guy that we can't trust, we can't confide in. And if you're that kind of person, that has an effect on me working with you and me trusting you in business. So it's interesting. I would suggest that all three of these things, knowing your place and not stepping above it, avoid trying to be contentious and fighting, and then avoid trying to betray confidences or rat people out. All three of those almost go against what I see today being taught in business. If you want to succeed, we say you need to be this kind of individual. Well, put it to the test, long term. See who really succeeds in their financial endeavors in life. See who really does. I bet you it's the person that follows God instead of mankind. Question 3. To what does the teacher compare the words seasonably spoken? And this is verse 11.
Timely advice is lovely, like golden apples in a silver basket.
So what does this advice picture this?
Golden apple.
Yeah, you said golden apples in a silver basket.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have something different?
Settings of silver.
Apples of gold in settings of silver. That's what the teacher compares it to. I know very little about that, so any of you have something to say about that? Sounds like a good thing, I think, right? Sounds rich, huh? Expensive? I was gonna say, it's an apple, you can't really eat it, but it's a golden apple, you can sell and get a bunch of apples, right? That sounds good.
It can be extremely valuable. Like,
Yeah, say that again?
extremely valuable.
Extremely valuable. Boy, yeah. Words, that's kind of cool, seasonably spoken, choosing the right words. Some people, some of you really have a gift. Others of us don't. But it's something there again, back to that whole laziness thing we talked about, we can work on this. Knowing the right words to say. And if you don't know what to say, what are the right words to say?
Nothing.
Nothing! Your mother was right. It's the truth. Don't say it. And even if you're a fool, you'll be thought wise at that point because you keep your mouth shut. That's what Proverbs says. So yeah, but knowing when to speak, when not to speak, what is appropriate to say and what not to say, that is not knowledge so much. That is wisdom. That is true wisdom. And that is a cool thing to see. It's a beautiful thing. It's golden. Not just silver, it's gold. It's beautiful. Question 4. What is the teacher's advice regarding speech to one who wishes to advance in his place of employment? Verses 13 through 15.
Trustworthy messengers refresh like snow in summer. They revive the spirit of their employer. A person who promises a gift but doesn't give it is like clouds and wind that bring no rain. Patience can persuade a prince, and soft speech can break bones.
So I see 3 different things here. Number 1, if someone wants to move up, they need to be a faithful messenger. Need to be a faithful messenger. Secondly, whatever promises they make, they need to make good on those. They need to be a truthful messenger, a truthful person. And then finally, they need to show patience and they need to show calmness. Man, there again. Faithful messenger, someone who is consistent to their promises and they're patient and they're calm. I'm going to do a little stereotyping. Please forgive me, okay? I don't mean for it to be bad, but I think a lot of people think about this anyway. When I look at this advice, somebody like me might look at this advice about being faithful, consistent, you're good on your promises, you show up for work, and you show patience, and you seem calm, you don't seem like you're putting yourself way out there. Sometimes that can look like the person that's worked at McDonald's for a decade. When you look at that person, you're like, they're back there, they're never moving up, they're never getting any better. We in America consider that dead-end job. How are we saying that this seems to describe that person so well, so how is it this is good advice for moving up in your place of employment? It might, I don't know if that thought goes into your head or not. I think it does for some people, so I think we need to make it clear here. Sometimes when you're looking at the person that has worked at McDonald's for a decade or whatever, just seems to not be going anywhere in their job and they're just staying there, a lot of times we just assume because we see them there so much that they are this kind of person who's faithful, who always keeps their promises and always shows patience and calmness. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there are a number of people that have worked at a place for many, many years and they haven't moved up because, quite frankly, they're not talented enough and they don't show enough initiative or effort to move up. And the bosses and a lot of other people, because of that, they don't move them up. That's a true thing. Some of it gets back to laziness. Some people are very content staying right where they are, and that is what they want to do. So don't confuse God's word with something that it's not talking about, right? Because I don't believe it's talking about that. Now, that there is persecution, there are other things that could hold people back for sure. But when we're talking about someone who's faithful, someone who is consistent, and someone who is truly patient, who is truly able to be calm, have you thought about the kind of people you like to work for? The kind of people you want to be at the head of this company? I guarantee you a lot of us would pick this kind of a person over a lot of others.
You know, Sophie, I've been in the workforce a long time now, and so I've seen generational trends, but among employers today, I've heard it commented many, many times that the older workers that have this work ethic of you get to work on time, you do the job, you're done, or whatever, they said if we could get younger workers who would just consistently show up on time and do the job, they would rapidly advance, because generally speaking, the generations that have come past us, we have not passed on our work ethic successfully.
Isn't that interesting?
It's a matter of just showing up faithfully and doing the job, like the proverb says, will probably result in promotion.
Definitely, definitely. You know, I have to admit it is hard sometimes, because I do think when God says something, we should put it to the test for sure. And let's do that. But the two things about Proverbs, number one is they're not hard and set in stone rules. They're wise observations. And number two, sometimes God knows when you're following him just because you want the blessing. And you're not really following him in that sense. You just want, your God is good things. And you've got to get what your God says. Yeah.
I think the key in this is, for one, you know, going back a few questions, is not building up on basically the bodies of the people you slash behind, you know, beside you. You know, it's supposed to put people down to go up. But when you're given a job, and you know, it might not be the one that you necessarily want at the time, but you can't, a lot of people I see, especially today, are like, oh, I want this so bad, and they're like, how do I get there, how do I get there? And they don't even focus on where they're at now. It's like, if you master the job you're doing, do the best you can possibly do, you know, don't sit there and be like, oh, well, this person is doing better, so let's find a way to, you know, get them below me. Well, how about you just work your butt off, do the best you can do at the job you're doing, and that in itself speaks for itself. You know, and then that's when, okay, they're really, really good at this, I bet they can handle more responsibility, and, you know, going on and up. And people don't focus on where they're at, they focus on the future too much.
That's a good point. You reminded me of something, and I don't remember the details, as usual, sorry. But there was a study done comparing two different types of people in the workforce. One of them was the kind of person, they both wanted really good job security. And so one of them went about getting really good job security by making themselves indispensable. They had it set up to where their part of the job was something only they knew how to do, and they kind of configured it in such a way that they were, if you don't have me, you don't know how to get this part done, you don't get this done, the whole business doesn't work right. They positioned themselves to be indispensable. And there were other people in this that were the exact opposite. They tried to position themselves to almost not even need to be there. They tried to empower other people to do every single part of the job so that it got done really fluently. And you know what they found, right? The people that were more successful, better job security, not the ones that made themselves indispensable. It was the ones that tried to work themselves out of a job. Those are the ones that companies thought, wait a minute, we want to keep this guy. You know, I think it makes sense. I think it's in line with what Scripture is telling us. You know, and it goes along with what you were just saying too. So, what moderation? Question 5. What moderation should a young employee show? Verse 16 and 17.
If you find honey, eat just enough, too much of it, and you'll vomit. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, too much of you, and he will hate you.
That's good little advice, right? So what do we have? Moderation in eating, and then we have moderation in your associations, right? We talked about these things last week, right? What happens when you wear out your welcome with somebody?
Kick you out.
They'll kick you out if they're brave, or else they won't kick you out, but they'll despise you, and you don't want that. Yeah, you know, I kind of wonder in my mind, is the honey illustration one of two different things? You know, is he saying you need to moderate what you eat and moderate who you associate with? Or is he saying, hey, here's an example, you like honey, right? But what happens when you drink a gallon of it? You don't like honey so much anymore, right? Kind of gross. Well, think about that when you think about who you're associating with. You know what, you might enjoy this visit, but there's a time where, okay, we're done. We're going to bed now, and please don't stay the night. Please go, you know. So I wonder if it could be going either way here. As a side note to this, years ago somebody sent me an article, and it was talking about the connection between people with healthy eating habits and healthy dieting habits and their spiritual health or their spiritual maturity, I guess. And I didn't read it, I just heard about it. But evidently the conclusion of this was that people who had better eating habits tended to have better spiritual health and spiritual, good spiritual habits too. It makes sense that there'd be a connection there. It kind of reminds us there is not this big disconnect between, well, I know there's my body and my flesh and the stuff that I do here, but my heart's really for God, my inside, who I really am. It's for, no, if your heart's really for God, then your flesh and every part of you is all going to kind of go along with that. We're all together here in this. So, let's see. Question 6. To what does the teacher compare one who displays untimely cheerfulness? Verse 20.
Like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar on soda, is he who sings songs to a troubled heart.
Did you experience this proverb before? You ever run into someone who's just doesn't understand the mood of the room, doesn't understand the situation? Well, this is a great example. This is a good way to. I like this because this is written so long ago, and yet there are a lot of people they'll tell you all their hard luck stories about, man, I just can't seem to keep jobs like I should, and it's always the job's fault. They just didn't understand this, or they didn't get me, or they were terrible at this skill or that skill. And then you come to find out what? You're just annoying. You are an annoying individual. You are like that vinegar and soda combination. Like, get out of here. It's not that you're a terrible worker per se, but people just don't want to be around that, right? Someone who runs in being loud and singing songs when you have a headache and you're just trying to, meditate, you're not thinking good thoughts about that person, are you? I'm not. I know I'm not. You have a comment?
I call you sinner.
Oh, yeah, I know. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, and so he likens it to what? Vinegar on soda, or someone who takes off that outer garment, that thick coat, when it's freezing outside. Maybe we can't relate to that here, but there is a such thing as cold. Yeah, it's just, it doesn't feel good. It makes people uncomfortable. There's someone that, what was it? All right, I'll give you a quick illustration. I was at a youth event, and sometimes those turn emotional. I think it was a lock-in or a big house or something. And somebody's close friend had died, and a number of people heard about it, and they were all teary, and it was sad. And so I was just kind of sitting in the corner, like, this is an opportunity to not say anything because people are upset, And so I was letting that happen, and then somebody walked in not knowing what had happened, and so their words were, wow, this party really died. Now, they didn't know better, right? So it wouldn't have been all that terrible. Life would have moved on. But then another one of the young adults at that particular moment said, ooh, poor choice of words. And I was like, you idiots. That is a perfect example of the kind of thing we're talking about. You know what? Yes, it was a poor choice of words, but you didn't have to glamorize it. We could have just let this one try to slide under the radar and no one would have noticed, but you had to point that out. Well, I think that's the same kind of thing. Like, I'm not saying you did something sinful, but you did do something kind of annoying and inappropriate. And you're wondering why you're not moving up in the world. Well, that could be part of it. All right, how does the teacher advise us to treat our enemies? Verse 21 and 22.
If your enemies are hungry, give them food to eat. If they are thirsty, give them water to drink. You will heap burning coals of shame on their heads, and the Lord will reward you.
Wow. You found this amusing, right?
I did.
So, all right, a couple of things I want to point out here. I can honestly say that someone on the side of the road with a sign that says they're hungry, they are not my enemy. All right, they're not. I don't give them food. And if they were my enemy, I guess I would have to, but they're not my enemy. I want to make that clear, okay? I think a lot of times they have a need that is not being addressed. They're just holding out a want. They want money or sustenance to get them by, and they're not willing to work for it. And scripturally, we talked about that at men's study too. But I don't think it's right to give someone something that they're not willing to work for. I think that's actually going against what God tells us to do. So I have a problem with that, and we have to get to know people. That's a side note. What is this talking about, the way we treat our enemies? This is exactly like what Jesus said. Jesus wasn't making a new earth-shattering comment when he said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. This is how we treat enemies. We do good things for them. Now, there's one way to take this passage, and it's probably the natural American way, and it's the way I took it for many years. And it's kind of cynical when you think about it. Why do we feed our enemy if they're hungry? Why do we give them a drink if they're thirsty? Because God says it's like heaping burning coals of fire on their heads. So why are we really doing it? Because I want to burn them, kill them with kindness. I want to make them hurt, right? Because secretly we're like, yeah, they're our enemy. We hate those people, and we want to make them pay. But we're going to do it the Christian way, with Christian revenge right here. I'm just going to be nice to you. Yeah. Well, we do that, and that is a possibility. I want to throw that out there. That is a possibility of what this verse might be talking about. If you're driving on the road and someone ever gives you the finger, that middle finger that talks about how many friends they had before their dog died, they do that. If you were to ever wave at that person and smile, yeah, you would see something that looks like you just threw burning coals on them. They're not very happy when you do that.
They might get worse.
They might get worse, yeah. Because that's one way, and I've heard this passage illustrated like that. However, what were, especially in this day and age, what were burning coals used for?
Cooking?
Yeah, cooking. What else? Really hot coals. What?
Staying warm?
Yeah, staying warm, but there's a particular trade that would require hot coals. A blacksmith, right? Why do you need burning hot coals if you're a blacksmith? Well, you got to melt that metal down to the point where it's pliable and you can beat that thing into whatever shape you need it to. Also, when they're refining stuff like gold, silver, what does that take? It takes some really hot burning coals, some intense heat in order to draw out the impurity and stuff. That's something that people would be familiar with. So if we're going with that metaphor, what could this verse actually be suggesting? When someone is mean to you, they're your enemy, and yet you repay them with kindness, you are treating them as if they're burning coals. Well, what do burning coals do to metal, and what do they do to gold? They allow it to be worked on. They allow it to be, the impurities to be pulled out. They allow the proper shape to be taken place. Is it possible that maybe God wants us to be nice to people, not just, be nice to our enemies, not just because we want to judge them back, we want them to feel insulted by how kind we are? Is it possible that maybe God is actually wanting to change their heart a little bit? Maybe God wants to mold them into a better person, and he's going to use that stinging coal, so to speak, that they didn't respond like I would have expected. I just insulted them. People always get mad. Why did they not get mad? Why do they genuinely seem not interested and want to be helpful? Maybe that'll cause them to question, and right there, maybe the burning coals are not talking about judgment. Maybe they're more so talking about God going to work on their heart. I think it was my dad that suggested that idea in a sermon one time, and I thought, man, that is a really good point. Kind of does away with the selfishness that I have, where I just want people to get burned because they're my enemy and I don't like them, right? But man, isn't that consistent with how God works?
It kind of goes back to the revenge verse too, about it's not up to us.
Yeah.
God will take care of that and
Boy.
possibly help the situation.
Absolutely. And maybe this is how God is helping. Maybe he's using these tough situations like, that you being kind even though they were mean as a burning coal that molds them, makes them moldable. God's finally getting through to them, and they're realizing they need to change who they are. They need to be different. But it's hard for us because we at the same time need to recognize, do we want them to be saved? Do we want them to be better? I think a really great heart check for me, and I think it is for a lot of other Christians, especially if you're younger in the faith, you want to evaluate yourself. Let's talk about people who are really, really bad. I don't remember who it was. Was it Jeffrey Dahmer? Was he the serial killer that supposedly became a Christian when he was in prison? Or was it somebody else? But it happens, right? There are biblical examples of this. All right, this person was awful. They killed a bunch of people, and then they became a Christian right before they died. How do you feel about that? Are you happy for them?
Yes.
Yeah. I hope we can get to the point where we can understand, we can be mature enough that we are happy for them, because that's what we want. That is really and truly what we want. So that's a good heart check for all of us. We want our enemies to be molded into the right kind of people.
Well, on the other side of that too, it's also, if you think about it, if you're sitting there and you're yelling at someone and they're just like, okay, well, I'm sorry you feel that way or whatever, you're not gonna keep up that momentum. You're not gonna, it's really hard to stay angry at someone that's being nice to you, genuinely nice to you, not sarcastic and like, yeah, okay, whatever. But, it's hard to stay mad at people that are being nice. And I think that might have another meaning there. Is like one way to squander enemies too, is you can't really keep them if you're not feeding into what they're looking for.
Yeah, you're not giving them a fight. You're deflating the situation. That's good. I agree. I do agree. Okay, let's see. We're in question 8 now. Does that sound right to you guys?
Mm-hmm.
All right. What? All right. I'm hoping it's 8. What is the duty of a good person in a corrupt society? Verse 26.
A good person who gives in to someone who is evil reminds you of a polluted spring or a poisoned well.
So, what is the idea? If a good person that gives into evil is like a polluted spring, James talks about this. He said, hey, my brothers, can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? He asked a rhetorical question. What's the obvious answer?
No.
No. What happens when you take fresh water and salt water? You get brackish water, right? And it's kind of all salty and messy, right? The two, it's not like an oil and water situation, right?
You get the Indian River.
Oh, yeah, this is true. Good point. But it's not like oil and water. Oil and water, you put them together and what happens? They just separate from each other, right? That is what they are. But you know what? That is not how humanity works. You cannot just say, oh, well, I'm good, but just this little part of me I'll allow myself to stoop to this level a little bit. No, you get polluted when that happens. You get polluted. So the obvious duty of a good person is to stay pure, to try to avoid being compromising or being corrupted in any way. And that's not an easy thing to do. But that's the duty of a good person, especially in a corrupt society. Which, a lot of people say things about government, and I think, well, maybe that's a good example. There are a lot of corrupt things that have gone on throughout the years, but it can be very hard to be a non-corrupted person in politics today. And I do think that's something fair to think about if you get in these bad moods like I do, where you just want to say not any nice things about politicians and what they do, I go through those moments. But then stop and think. If someone said, Seth, I want to make you a prominent politician right now, here you go. Would you take it? Would you want that job? Of course I don't want that job, because then all of a sudden, all this dirt on me is going to come out there, and probably most of it's not even going to be real. Hopefully they won't find the real stuff. That wouldn't be good.
You have to wear a suit too.
Yeah, whoa. No way. So, you guys understand, right? So pray for them rather than just bashing them all the time. Of what is the teacher warning us in chapter 25, verse 27 through 28?
It is not good to eat too much honey, and it is not good to seek honors for yourself. A person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls.
Cities without walls in that day. My understanding is, I've heard this before, cities without walls in that day a lot of times weren't even considered cities. You didn't have walls. You're just an open area ready to get taken over by ruthless men. That's all you are. It's almost not even worth calling you a city. So what is the teacher warning us here? Honey's a good thing, but if you eat too much of it, and he's already referenced this, not so good anymore, right? Too sweet, you can't handle it. Well, same thing with your own honor, with your own glory. You know what? Enjoy it. Sometimes if someone else wants to praise you, give you some admiration, you don't need to have false humility. What's false humility? What is that?
Oh, no.
False humility is where you deliberately put yourself down, and you're not really, you actually lie about yourself in a sense. You say, no, I'm not good at that. Oh, I can't do that. Well, that's false. That's not true. You are good at this. So that's false humility. Don't do that. If someone wants to praise you, you don't have to be arrogant about, well, of course you're right, I am that good. And I mean, you don't have to do that either. What do? You just can thank them. You can accept the honey, accept the moderation of honey. A little bit of honey, I put in my coffee, it tastes great. A lot of you guys might have good uses for honey too, but you probably don't go through gallons of it because that's too much and it's not good for you, it's not healthy. Well, enjoy the praise.
It's expensive too.
And it's expensive unless you keep bees. Then it's painful. We have some experience with that in the lawnmower, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, accept it in moderation. Don't reject the good things. Maybe that's God's way of rewarding you a little bit. I think God does that sometimes. He allows us to enjoy a little bit of honey, so to speak, a little bit of glory and good things. And we should thank Him for that. Human types. All right, we have just enough time to jump into a verse or two of chapter 26, which I would like to do. Why should a fool not be given a position of honor? Chapter 26, verse 1.
Like snow in summer or rain in harvest, honor is not fitting for a fool.
Why should a fool not get honor? They said you shouldn't. Why? What reason do you think of?
It's not honorable.
It's not right. I
People
totally
might want
agree.
to be like that.
What?
People might want to be like him.
Yes. If you idolize something, if you give somebody a place of prestige, others look up to them. When others look up to them, more people copy them. And you don't want them to copy a fool. You just don't. It's not right. Now look at our culture today. Do we ever give honor to people that are fools? Yes, we do. What happens as a result? Well, I would submit, just look at what happens today. You can probably go to any grocery store, down any checkout aisle, and look at any magazine cover, and look at some of the people that you see there, and you think, wow, what good has our culture received from these covers right here, these famous people? What good have we, what's benefiting us? And you're going to find not very much. We wasted some time and some gossips going around and stuff like that, but it's not beneficial, really. Question 11, how are we to deal with a fool in an argument? This is interesting. Verse 4 and verse 5.
Don't answer the foolish arguments of fools, or you will become as foolish as they are. Be sure to answer the foolish arguments of fools, or they will become wise in their own estimation.
All right, we're going to end with this. So wait, answer a fool according to his folly, or according to their argument? Or in the next verse it says, don't answer a fool according to his folly. Rabbis really had a hard time with this one. What do you make of this? Are we supposed to answer a fool according to their folly? Or are you not supposed to answer the fool? Well, the easy answer, yes. The easy answer is yes. So, what are we looking at? Basically, I think the way to understand this is there are times when it is appropriate to answer the fool in the way that they are ignorant and foolish. You can respond back in the same level and it's appropriate. Other times, it is not appropriate. You're only leading to a situation that it's like the practical jokes. It's just going to spiral out of control and go nowhere. So I think I've told you guys this before. I'll use it again because it's the illustration that pops into my head first. Doc Smith, my Old Testament professor, had a girl in class ask a really dumb question, a really stupid question. And so he gave her a really smart answer back, and smart in not a nice way. He kind of let her have it because he was convinced she's disrupting this class. She's, got ill intent. And so he's the kind of guy that he didn't like to get pushed around like that. So he put her in her place for that dumb question. Afterwards, he had answered the fool according to his folly. Afterwards, the girl came up in tears. And what did he realize then? She said, I really wanted to know the answer to that question. He realized at that moment, like, whoops, He answered the fool according to his folly, so he thought, but that was actually the wrong verse he applied there. If he had understood that this girl was really sincere, he would have never done that. He would not have answered her according to her folly. So what does that mean? She asked a really dumb question. We're all not really denying the fact that that question wasn't the smartest thing to ask. But you're in a situation where you can respond. How do you respond? Can you respond like that was a dumb question? Yes. But can you respond like that was actually a good thing to ask and it's beneficial, it's going to help people out, and I'm glad you asked that? Yes, you can. And by the way, I'm thankful for this myself because I've asked my fair share of pretty dumb questions. And it's great when, especially if you've asked the question and then they call on you and you ask it, and then like a second later you realize, oh, that was so stupid. Why did I say that? I should have just known the answer. Some people are so gracious that they can take the dumbest question and turn it into the most intellectually thought-provoking answer I've heard in a long time. And I really appreciate those people because I've experienced some of them where I asked that question, I'm like, man, I'm embarrassed now. I wish I wouldn't have even asked. I should have known. But they took it and they used it for something good. And I believe they applied this proverb properly. They looked at me, they looked at the situation, and they decided, okay, don't answer this fool according to his folly.
Well, what I did in high school, I knew the question I was going to ask was stupid. God. That's why I would say ahead of time, I said, I think this is a pretty pathetic question, but I think there's other people in the audience here that want to ask that question.
Okay.
And
Gotcha.
Of course, he would scratch his head and go, well,
Yes.
I've already answered that question before, but I'll answer it again.
Now, I don't want us to leave before I mention this. What is the biblical definition of a fool? A fool is the one who said in his heart what? There is no God. So if we apply that definition here, what do? Do we answer a fool according to his folly or not? I think there's some wisdom there. Are people genuinely wanting to know about God, or do they want to argue? And we need to discern that so we know how we should answer. Or sometimes not answer, because this is not the right moment for us to try to witness to you. This is clearly not the time. Any questions or comments? Any other thoughts? Thanks for sharing, guys. Some good stuff today. Let's go ahead and pray before we leave. Father, right now, since we're kind of ending here, I want to pray for the wisdom that we need to recognize how we are to answer those that might ask a foolish question, or people that are foolish for rejecting you, for not saying in their heart that there really is a God, but instead saying there's not. Father, would you help us to discern the opportunity and the timing so that we can give the right kind of answer? And God, please do help us to be able and ready to give that answer, because we know that's our responsibility. You told us that. So help us to be brave and diligent and careful. And we ask these things in Jesus' name.
Thanks, Seth.
Oh, thank you.